all right with all of you, though technically I'm the president, I'm going to take that hat off for this particular moment in time. One of the funny things about being the president is not only that I get to stand up here at the podium a lot, talk to you a lot, and listen to you a lot, but it's that you never get to not be president. I live in the president's house. I'm married to the president's husband. Kids are my kids. My kids think they're the president. No. But this is a special opportunity for me. A lot of the rest of this week, this inauguration, is going to be about me. About me being president. So for me tonight, while the president's husband is at home with the president's kids who are hopefully sleeping, it's not about me as the president, it's about me as me. And me as me starts with who raised me, as it does for most of us. Starts with where you were born, it starts with where they were from, it starts with all the things we heard about today. But what you think about those things and how you feel about those things and how you own those things starts with what you're shown as much as what you're taught. And I was raised by two children of World War II, which makes me sound kind of old. But my parents were old when they had me. So I am a child of World War II. And why does that matter to this conversation? It matters because I'm half Jewish and I'm half Japanese. And while you could argue that sometimes in everyday life those things don't mean a whole hell of a lot, at that moment in World War II they meant everything. And they meant everything in ways that were not about just who you are and who you wanted to be. They were life and death. So what does that mean to me? That means that while I was the only half Asian kid, well, the only Asian kid for a while, but the only half Asian kid in my grade school, which meant the inevitable kids' jokes and everything else, which didn't really bother me all that much, except because I'm a little bit self-righteous. I always felt the need to correct people. Now it's just a job hazard. And it matters not really because of that, though. It matters because the first story that I ever heard about being anything, right? It wasn't about being not white or whatever. It was just about being who I am and being from where I'm from, or my mother being from where she's from. She's the Japanese one. You'll meet her at inauguration if you haven't met her already. Is that in 1942, February of 1942, anybody know what happened? Executive Order 9066 happened. Executive Order 9066 happens. I don't expect you all to know, it's not a quiz. What Executive Order 9066 was. I actually had to look up the number myself before I came here. But that was the executive order that interned Japanese Americans in this country for the duration of World War II following Pearl Harbor. Now, you guys all learned that in school. I actually didn't learn it until much later in school. I knew it when I was a little kid because my mother was in Tule Lake, which is in Washington State. All the Japanese Americans, West Coast, and a little bit further in were rounded up and sent to internment camps. They certainly weren't wonderful places. They weren't concentration camps either. In fact, technically, I guess you could say they were concentration camps in that they were meant to concentrate the Japanese American population because, in fact, what was happening in Germany and Poland, those were concentration camps, those were death camps. But I'll call them internment camps because concentration camps is a rightly loaded phrase. So that's what I knew about being Japanese American. 5 or 6. My mother was 6 or 7 when that happened to her. She went in with her mother and her brother. And there are all kinds of kid stories that I know about that time, about having her coupon for her, do you guys know what bomb pops are? The ones that are like red and white and blue. Having her coupon, because they had coupon tickets for food in the camp, having her coupon stolen by another kid, and that was like the most devastating moment of being in the camp, because she was a kid. But I knew that it happened, and I knew that it happened when most of my peers didn't know that it happened. And because I knew that it happened at that age, I don't remember my mother telling me, it was just something that I knew. I also knew about the death camps in Europe when I was about that age, which, while I grew up in a predominantly Jewish part of New York City, I think most of my peers didn't know, because it was the kind of thing that was considered to be something you didn't tell really young children for obvious reasons, and it requires quite a bit of explanation. You don't sit them down and make them watch the show, which my parents didn't do either. The show is a 9-hour film of just pure footage of the cleaning up, essentially, of the death camps, and other footage as well, footage of people in the death camps. And so that was my understanding of what it was, in a sense, to be Japanese and Jewish. The other piece of what I understood, and the other piece of what makes me, in some fundamental sense, a child of World War II, though I was born many, many years later, and a lot happened in between, is that was my awareness of race. So when my uncle, Japanese American, married my aunt, Chinese American, the parents were black to the wedding, the grandparents rather, were black to the wedding, because the sense was, though it was many years later, that the Chinese and Japanese were still mortal enemies. And that's a product of World War II, and it's a product of World War II that is not gone. I'll get a little to my international experience in a minute. But one of the things that I learned very quickly when I started doing international diplomacy work is that if I met someone who was Chinese, they would also ask me, because I picked China because I started my work in Asia largely in China, they would also ask me where I was from. There's a slightly different look to it, but it's the same question. They wanted to know if I was Chinese or not. And when I told them that I wasn't Chinese, that in fact I was Japanese, I had to tell them, I felt, and probably rightly, that I'm fourth generation American, and that my great-grandparents came over here long before World War II, long before the most alive and remembered moments of Japanese contra Chinese aggression. So that was my going-in sense of what it was to be mixed of these particular two backgrounds. But I was very much raised also with the sense that to be mixed is a gift. And for me, I don't think it was ever said. It doesn't mean that to be not mixed has not been given a gift. It's just that it is a different kind of gift. And in my case, I didn't really understand it for quite a long time. I didn't have any resentment about who I was or where I came from. I just didn't particularly spend a lot of time on it. I didn't have to. My social situation didn't force me to. I didn't think about it all that much. Until I got into the world of work. And when I got into the world of work, I found that I actually could move through all kinds of situations, only being noticed when I wanted to be. And that opened up incredible experiences for me. It also opened up professional opportunities for me. So when I was working in the U.S. government, there was nothing that was more anxiety-inducing to me, other than being testifying before Congress, although I kind of like that sick way, than receiving a Japanese delegation. Because I was never Japanese enough, although they were very, very polite. I was never Japanese enough. And yet, my anxiety was twinned with what I know was extraordinary advantage. Because they were also much more open with me. So I had anxiety, they had more openness. And in that moment, when I was getting over my own anxiety, which took a while, I realized, again, what an advantage it can be. And I had the same advantage in some ways in China, in Southeast Asia, And in Asian countries where I don't look anything like the people who are from there, what's that about? Where does that come from? And I think it comes from something like what Norma described, which is an ability to put yourself to the side and try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And it comes from a kind of curiosity, born in my particular case of being mixed race, but it doesn't have to come from there, of what it is to stand fully in one set of shoes or the other. Because in my case, and it may not be true for everybody else, being mixed race meant I spent a good chunk of the first part of my life trying to imagine what it would be like to be Japanese or to be Jewish, and figuring out kind of where I wanted to stand. And that means putting yourself in a bunch of different skins for a while. And it probably means kind of acting up one of those things or not for a while. And I think it helped me in my case to learn how to navigate being the only in some cases, how to navigate cultural differences in some cases. And I hope, so this is a lifelong project, how to cultivate something that goes beyond not offending people, something that at least borders on empathy. Because when I think about what's missing, and here goes my president's hat, when I think about what's missing in a lot of what, not we Bennington talk about when we talk about race relations, but we, the big we, whether we want to just talk about the United States or whether we want to expand it far beyond that. When I think about what's missing from that conversation, I think much more of it is empathy than we're willing to allow. Information is easy. Knowledge is a little harder. Empathy is nigh on impossible. But that's all the more reason why I think we should strive for it.